Oh, I love it. Look at that screen fill up. Hooray.
Greetings, everybody. Peter Maravellis here on behalf of City Lights Booksellers and Publishers and our partners at Goethe Institute, San Francisco, the MIT Press, and Center for International Security Studies at University of Sydney. I'd like to welcome you to the third session of our weekend-long symposium titled For the Protection of All Beings, an Inquiry into Advancing Technologies and Their Consequences and Possibilities. I'd like to take this moment to acknowledge we are beaming to you from the unceded ancestral homelands of the Ramaytush peoples, also known as the San Francisco Bay Area. I would like to take this moment to pay our respects to those who have come before us as stewards of the land. Joining us for this next session will be Fred Turner, no stranger to City Lights. It is a pleasure to have him back again. The title of his talk is called Seeing Silicon Valley, the Place, Not the Myth. In his presentation, Professor Turner explores the promise made by the pundits and marketers of the tech industry that digital media would help us build a new and better society on an imaginary electronic frontier. No matter how obviously false the myth may be, it still blinds many to the kind of world that technology industries have built on the ground in Silicon Valley. This talk will explore that world through the lives of some of the region's uncelebrated local residents. Their experiences, it concludes, reveal the kind of society toward which we may all be hurtling, a society playful and precarious, with an economy open to all, but on radically unequal terms. Fred Turner is the Harry and Norman Chandler Professor of Communication at Stanford University, where he studies the impact of new media technologies on American culture. He is the author of 5 books, including most recently with Mary Beth Meehan, Seeing Silicon Valley, Life Inside a Fraying America, which this talk is based upon. It is just a magnificent collection of photos and text, and we've been huge champions of it at City Light. Professor Turner has been a Guggenheim Fellow, a Leboff Distinguished Visiting Scholar at New York University, a Beaverbrook Visiting Scholar at McGill University, amongst other wonderful honors. He continues to write regularly for newspapers and magazines, both in America and Europe. So please join us now in offering a warm welcome to Professor Fred Turner. Welcome to City Lights.
Oh, thank you, Peter. Gosh, it's great to be here. And I just want to urge folks, if they feel like it at all, to turn on their cameras. It's delightful to be able to talk with you. And I see your names, which is kind of wonderful. But it's also, of course, lots of fun to see your faces. This feels a lot like it used to feel when I was teaching in Zoom time. Oh, yay, look, there's, yay, Danielle, thank you, appreciate that, hooray. Oh gosh, there's Thomas, thank you. Noemi, thank you, great, appreciate it. Jim, thanks, yay. Oh, look, here they come, I love it. Now it feels like a party. This is great, much happier here. Thank you very much. Peter, I see you there, I do, there you are, hi, good to see you, yay, all right. So I'm really excited to be here today. It is an honor to be able to talk at City Lights, even virtually. And Peter and City Lights have been especially gracious hosts and promoters of the book I'm going to talk about today, Seeing Silicon Valley. I'm going to talk for about 40 minutes, I think, maybe a little bit less, and we'll go to Q&A as fast as we can. I think Peter's going to manage the Q&A part, and so he's hiding in the background, and we'll coordinate us. I'm going to share screen as if we were in a lecture hall and show you some pictures. And I'm going to make an argument while I do that. And the argument I'm going to make in a nutshell is that in Silicon Valley today, we are living in the wake of a mythology that is hundreds of years old and enormously powerful. I'm going to try to walk us through how that's working and the effects that it's having in our technical world. If you do have questions, by all means, post them in the chat. I may not see them, but do, and then Peter will catch them, and we can pause there. And likewise, if anything's funky on the tech side, please let us know. All right, let me get going here. All right, let me go to the slide view. Great. Okay. Now, because Danielle, I happen to see you in my screen. Can you see that screen? Okay. Does it say Seeing Silicon Valley? Great. Okay. Terrific. All right. So, about 1.5 years, 2 years ago, my colleague Mary Beth Meehan, who's a fabulous photographer who did all the images that you're going to see today, wonderful photographer, works out of Rhode Island, and really a portraitist. We did a book. We did this book, Seeing Silicon Valley, and we could not get it published in the United States. We tried and we tried. I had an agent. who is no longer my agent for reasons that will become clear in a moment. I'd published 4 books at that point. I'd done trade books, I'd done academic books, and everywhere we went, we were told that's not Silicon Valley. That's not Silicon Valley. And you can see this is Teresa, who is a taqueria lady here in Silicon Valley. I assure you that she is absolutely at the center of Silicon Valley. And it took us 2 years to get it published in America. We actually had it published in France first. It came out in France, and only after it had been out for 2 years in France did an American publisher pick it up. And that was my publisher, Chicago. Let's see, I'm going to just make sure I'm going to admit. Good. I have to do some admitting while I'm talking, so I might occasionally just get kind of interrupted. The question is, why did it have to appear in France first? What was it that American publishers could not see when they saw this book? And why couldn't they see it? It just sort of astonished me. They would say, that's not Silicon Valley. Where's Elon Musk? Where's Mark Zuckerberg? That's Silicon Valley. And this kind of made it clear to me that there's a deeper problem afoot. And the problem is that we Americans literally cannot see Silicon Valley as a place. And because we can't understand the political, technological, and economic changes that its actual existence foreshadows. And so that's what I'm hoping we can talk about today. I'm going to try to answer the questions I just posed with 3 more questions. First, what is Silicon Valley in a very mundane sense? What is the place? What are its boundaries? What's it known for? And then a second order question, what is Silicon Valley really? What is this place? And then I'll conclude the talk by asking what these answers tell us about our technological and political futures. And I'll basically, the talk will break into 2 parts. In the first part, I'm going to talk about the mythology that animates Silicon Valley. And in the second part, I'm going to talk about the lives of the actual people who live there, using images and stories from seeing Silicon Valley. So that's where we're headed. All right, any questions as we get underway? Okay, great. It really feels like I've gone back 2 years and I'm teaching again. It's kind of great. Okay. All right. So, folks, if you're in California for this talk, you may know that Silicon Valley is, a lot of the San Francisco Peninsula. It stretches from San Jose in the south to about San Mateo in the north, and then there's a whole new startup cluster in South San Francisco. And it was only named Silicon Valley about 1970, 1971. Before that, it was known as the Valley of Heart's Delight and was a farming region. My house was built in 1954. I live in Mountain View, about 2 miles from Google. And, my house was the first house built on this land. Before that, it was farming land. And before that, it was just natural land. And this region is naturally known for technological innovation. It's the place where the first silicon chip comes along in 1961. It's a place where we start to get the first desktop computers. We start to get screens, teletypes, and the internet in particular in 1968. And it's, of course, the place where Apple Computer came along in 1975. One note on the Apple Computer that you see in front of you, because it's going to be important later in the talk. Apple did not market its first computers, that's the very first Apple computer, with a wooden box. Its users felt that the computer was a little bit too technological, and they wanted to make it align more with nature, with the values of the counterculture. And so many users built boxes like these for their Apple I's. And in part, Apple would later leverage that as a marketing campaign. Apple, of course, would be the computer that would make 1984 not like 1984. The scope of technological innovation and manufacturing in Silicon Valley is really actually almost impossible to get your head around. In 2017, 19,000 patents emerged from the 2-county region that is Silicon Valley, Santa Clara and San Mateo counties. Simply astonishing, 19,000 patents. And that number has held steady for a decade, more or less. I mean, up and down a little bit. It's simply an astonishing number. And the products that have emerged here, again, are astonishing. The Apple Watch, the silicon wafer, the silicon chip, now self-driving cars, eBay, Google, Facebook, the iPhone. I mean, it is simply an astonishing list. And this is what we're known for as a region worldwide. And it's a powerful story. And of course, it's true in the sense that, yeah, we make a lot of stuff and it's good stuff. But Silicon Valley is something else as well. Silicon Valley is what the Puritan minister, John Winthrop, back in 1630, called a city on a hill. Now, you'll have to forgive me. We're going to jump back 200 years. We're going to jump across the continent, 3,000 miles, and we're going to go back to Massachusetts for a minute. And we're going to go back to Plymouth in particular. So some of you may be familiar with the sermon, A City on a Hill. John Winthrop was a Puritan minister coming over from England. And when he delivered the sermon, he delivered it on board a ship that was struggling in the weather and would soon land in Massachusetts. And he said, when we get there, we need to be as a city upon a hill. The world's eyes shall be upon us, and we need to be a light unto that world. And this notion of a city on a hill has animated American life for hundreds of years. And I want to argue that it animates Silicon Valley today in a way that we don't recognize, don't understand, and that's what gives it its power. So I'm going to do a little bit of sort of myth analysis here. It won't take too long, but I hope it will be valuable as we go forward. So if you've been in grad school and read Max Weber, you'll remember the Protestant ethic. For Puritans, they had a couple of beliefs that still hover in the air in Silicon Valley. One belief was God has already decided who's going to heaven. Okay, it's called predestination. God, before you were ever born, decided you're one of the heaven bound, you're not. Oops. Okay, so the Puritans all come to America and they're desperate to find out, am I going to heaven or am I one of the ones that's going to go down? Well, how do you know? They didn't know, but they thought, if God loves me enough to take me up to heaven forever, he's probably going to let me make some money here on earth. And gradually for the Puritans, wealth became here on earth one of the key signs of godly salvation. God was likely to take you up, and you were likely to see other saints on this earth who were going to be taken up if you were wealthy. You would look around your town, Plymouth, Massachusetts. Oh, he's a successful farmer. He's got money. He must be one of God's chosen people. And these chosen people, the ones that God had elected ahead of time, were called saints. Okay, let's just pause there for a minute. Now, jumping direct to Silicon Valley, if I can here, just going to get, Silicon Valley is a place that is inhabited by a very similar mythos. It is a place like Plymouth, Massachusetts, to which people come from around the world on a kind of pilgrimage in the hope that they will be able to imitate the lives of people they have been told are in fact elect in one way or another. People for whom wealth and technological control, like Steve Jobs, is a sign not only that they've accrued great power, but that they are special people, good people, and if this were the Puritan era, that they would be the kind of people who are going to heaven. I became aware of this when I was actually looking at some images from China, from a hackathon in China, and there in the former haunt of Mao Zedong, on the wall, in a way that would have been a picture exactly where Mao would have hung in the 60s, was a picture of Steve Jobs. This got my attention. If Steve Jobs is hanging in Shandong province as an emblem of the kind of future that people want on the other side of the earth, then he has become a kind of saint in the Puritan sense. His wealth was the evidence that he was doing something right. Now, of course, Silicon Valley is peopled by all kinds of saints of this kind, as the press likes to remind us. It's so interesting. The press in Silicon Valley likes to tell us constantly about these folks with tremendous amounts of money, tremendous amounts of power. And of course, if you look at them, you'll notice that they have a couple of things in common. They're all boys. They're all white. They're all of a certain age. They all have a certain background and a certain training. And this too is a feature of Plymouth, Massachusetts. I'll talk about that in just a sec. The key point here is that the press and local folks hold up these people, these men, as emblems not only of achievement, but of a kind of special ability, almost superpower, that's available to people when they migrate here to Silicon Valley. All right, pause for a little more history. We're gonna leave the historical zone in just a minute, but I thought you might enjoy this. This is a modern rebuild of Plymouth Plantation in Massachusetts, and people live there all day and act out the roles of real Plymouth citizens. So if you've had American history, you'll remember that the citizens of Plymouth thought of themselves as a community gathered together to accrue wealth in order that they may show the sign that God loved them. And that is very much, of course, what we're doing here in Silicon Valley. You might also remember that Plymouth Plantation was a place that excluded Native Americans on racial grounds, but also on ethnic grounds, on the ground that they were less than human. They were less than human. And within the Puritan makeup of the colony, there were saints who were going to heaven, and there were ordinary folks, notably homosexual sailors, who were not, who were monstrous in their view. The Plymouth Plantation of yore was a place where sainthood was in part built on the mechanics of discrimination, not simply intellectual discrimination, but actual fencing and later warfare with the peoples against whom they were arrayed. Now, you've read about this, in, sort of what happens down the line with Nathaniel Hawthorne, Hester Prynne, all of that. This is even before that. What I want to argue is that the notion that a community of saints is open to all and is a benevolent organization is broken from the get-go. And that the notion that God has chosen who's going to heaven, that he is looking at you to see if you're wealthy, and that you must look at the other folks around you to see if they're wealthy, to see if you too might be getting to heaven or if they might be getting to heaven. That worldview is a worldview that excludes all kinds of different people, and literally in the Puritan era and in our own makes it impossible to see where we actually are in time and space. All right, let me just pause here. Let's see. Is this making sense? It's a little awkward within Zoom land. If it's making sense and you're on screen, if you can nod your head, and if you have a question, go no sense at all. So heads up and down or head sideways. Okay, great. I'll take it. Good. Thank you, David. Appreciate that. Great. Okay. All right. Good. All right. So the logic of visible sainthood, I would argue, has blinded us to the reality of Silicon Valley today, just as it blinded the pilgrims to the indigenous and natural ecosystems in which they settled. And I want to apply this. The logic of visible sainthood. What I mean by this is a way of looking at the world that emerges first in Puritan England, comes to America, and very much comes across the country and animates this region. And the idea is that there really are special people among us whose wealth makes visible their specialness. And when that kind of mythology takes hold, people begin to look at one another and try to see, are you that? Are you that? And all of the attention goes to the saints and not to the folks in the actual community. And this is our challenge today. So here's a few quick facts. I get my facts, by the way, from something called the Silicon Valley Index, which is the best single resource for understanding what's happening in Silicon Valley. It comes out every year. It's an incredible trove of fact. So we think of Silicon Valley as beautiful, sort of natural. I live in Mountain View, like I said, about 2 miles from Google HQ. I have a beautiful backyard. I have grass. I have trees. It looks really nice. It is, in fact, Santa Clara County, one of the most polluted regions in the entire United States. Santa Clara County has the highest number of Superfund sites in any county in America, and that's 23. Superfund sites are sites that companies have generally left behind that are so polluted that no one company could clean it up. The state has to do it. In the last couple of years, analysts who do the Superfund site work have found 500 patches of polluted ground here in Silicon Valley. And the details from this are all in my book as well, so worth going to. In 2017, 14% of pregnant women in the Valley lacked nutritionally adequate food. Now, let's just absorb this fact for a minute. We are living in a region where the last time I checked, there were 17 billion with a B billionaires. My guess is it's gone quite up from there. I checked a couple of years ago. And yet, more than 1 out of 10 pregnant women do not have enough food to eat. That's just baffling. In 2019, just under half of all African-American households and more than half of Latino households live below the poverty level. Now, bear in mind, this is a national poverty level, not a poverty level set to the incredibly expensive world of Silicon Valley. These numbers blow my mind. My point here is that we are inhabiting a world that is radically unequal, not only because of the economics of digital manufacturing, but because of the mythology of saints and the damned. So who actually does live here? All right, so these are just a few images, and I'm going to walk through the lives of a few different people here. These are folks who Mary Beth Meehan got to know, and Mary Beth's not here today, but I want to really celebrate her work. She's a nationally known portrait photographer. She's done beautiful, strange, wonderful, huge projects in a number of different cities where she's gone and embedded herself in a city, in this case, Silicon Valley, for about 8 weeks, gotten to know people, especially people who aren't visible in the story of the city as it's usually told, made these kinds of portraits, and then generally these portraits are turned into billboard-sized banners, which are hung by the city fathers in the towns where she's doing her work. And the banners from our book are currently hanging in Providence, Rhode Island at Brown University. Brown has done a huge exhibition, and Stanford is actually about to do an exhibition as well. And those photographs are powerful interventions in the public life of the places where they're made. And these images come also with stories. And so the book is filled with stories, and Mary Beth got those stories. So I'm just going to sort of do a little bit of Mary Beth here for you today. I've got my book here, and I'm going to just try to get it out together for you. There we go. All right, so let's talk about some of the folks who are here. The first thing to notice is that the folks here are from all different countries. More than 50% of the residents of Silicon Valley speak a language other than English at home, and 38% were born outside the United States. And this is partly what I mean about being a city on a hill. Silicon Valley magnetically draws people of all different classes and all different work schemes to it to try to make a living and to try to become saints, to sort of test themselves against the economy. So the outcomes of these things are a little bit strange sometimes. So that's Ravi and Gautami are there on the left, lying down. They're a couple. They have 4 advanced degrees between them in things like biotech and pharmacology. They live in Foster City, actually, and then come to work over here. And they have not been able to find a way to make enough money to more than get by, despite their advanced degrees. They don't know whether they're going to be able to stay in the valley or not. They simply haven't found a way to crack the nut as they hope to. To their right are G and Virginia and their children. You can't see their children. There's just one in the picture, but there's a few more there. If you look at G and Virginia, you'll see in the background a couple of boxes. I find this fascinating. So they are technologists. They're wonderful, and they built a house. Okay, they bought the house, built it, great, and they spent so much money on the house that they couldn't afford furniture. And I'm not actually kidding. So they're living in this house without furniture, and their stuff is in boxes until they save up a little bit more money. John down on the left there in the beautiful checked shirt. John actually went through a training program. Let me just get this right. Let me just go to the right page and get it right. Yeah, so John's actually from East Palo Alto, where he lives now. He grew up in a largely Black community, and eventually went to and organized something called Street Code Academy to offer free coding for students who can then enter the workforce. It's really interesting. We tend to think in Silicon Valley that there isn't an African-American population. Well, there certainly is and has been for a long time. It's one of the things this book addresses. But it's a population that's not fully integrated into the tech scene. And of course, that's Teresa down on the lower right. Teresa is from Mexico. She works in a taqueria. And what I love about this portrait is the way in which Mary Beth's choice of how to frame her is borrowed from the Renaissance. It says, this woman is as beautiful as any Pietà that you will see. This woman is as beautiful as the women you'll see in churches. And I just love that. It's a kind of respectful gaze that's very valuable. It's very different than the kind of Protestant saint gaze we're trained toward. All right, I'll walk through a couple other lives. This is Cristobal. Cristobal is a security guard at Facebook, now Meta. So Mary Beth went to meet him. She had heard about him through a union. She went to meet him, and there's a big house you can see just to the left there. Mary Beth knocked on the door of the house, And the person in the house said, oh, no, 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 no. Cristobal lives around back. Cristobal lives in a garden shed without water or electricity, because he works for a Facebook contractor, and that's the kind of salary he has. So he works for one of the wealthiest corporations in America indirectly, working for a guard contractor. He checks those folks in, but he doesn't have enough money to actually be able to afford housing. He's a Marine, former veteran. He simply doesn't have that kind of stuff. And again, I live in Silicon Valley, and it's just amazing to see these little nooks and crannies in which folks who are not engineers are living their lives. So this is, let me just see who this is. Oh, this is Abraham and Brenda. Let me read to you a little bit about them. There they are. Okay, so they've been married for 28 years. Abraham was a tile setter. He lays tile. They lost their house in the crash of 2008. They lived for a while in shacks that they built themselves until the police ordered those dwellings demolished, again, twice. Finally, they take all of their savings and they put them into this trailer, which is where they live now. Now, I teach at Stanford, which has to be the fanciest campus on the planet, certainly a contender. And at the edge of campus, is a ring of trailers of folks who have no place to live otherwise, many of whom are employed. Abraham and Brenda were part of that group. Here in Mountain View, where I live, the city has had to put trailers in special compounds because they were starting to populate the streets. To my great embarrassment and shame, every street in Mountain View now has a sign that says, no RVs allowed to park here, fine of, I think it's $300. You know, it's just shameful. And again, there's this sort of logic of visibility. These folks cannot be seen, literally not be seen by the state or by the rest of us. Here's another kind of person who isn't usually seen when we talk about Silicon Valley. This is Mark, and I want to get the details right, so I'm going to flip the page here. I mentioned earlier that this is a region that's packed with Superfund sites. In the last decade or two, Silicon Valley has really become a kind of intellectual development hub. It's a place where, software is designed and developed. All of the manufacturing is done overseas. There's very little manufacturing here anymore. That didn't used to be true. We used to be a place first where chips were manufactured, then smaller computers. Apple actually made its computers here. And Mark's mom worked a long time ago when she was pregnant in a chip plant, working with chemicals there. And like other women in the plant, she gave birth to children with birth defects and with intellectual deficits. And these children can still be found throughout the valley. Mary Beth found Mark through, he's an adult now, I think he's in his 30s, found Mark through an attorney who is making it her business to try to gain some kind of recompense for these folks. It's very difficult. A lot of the companies that the people worked for were much smaller subcontractors from the large firms and have gone out of business. So it's very hard to even know who to sue. But my point is that there are people for whom the landscape is not beautiful, who are not roaming the landscape like free saints, but for whom the landscape is toxic and who live with its effects. And Mark is one of those. And finally, there's Warren, and Warren was a former VC. He now is a startup guy. He runs his own company. That's Warren sitting in the middle there. And this is actually his company at work right around him. And this is the Silicon Valley dream. This is what Mary Beth and I were told should be the cover of our book when we started talking to Americans. And I found that fascinating. This is the story we tell about ourselves. This is the top of the mountain. This is where the good skiing is, so to speak. If you look at Warren and his life, and that's what you focus on, how do I become a saint like Warren? How do I display my special skills? You miss all of the other people I've just shown you. And when you miss those folks, you lose the ability to ask how we can act, quite literally, for the protection of all beings in the space. To get to that, we need to ask the question, what do these lives have in common? One of the things I find fascinating about Silicon Valley is that it's a place where you can go up and down the class ladder, but you see very similar dynamics at work. Until you're Larry or Sergey at the very top, even if you're making good money, you may still be in a precarious situation. I live on a little cul-de-sac surrounded by mostly upper middle level engineers. who change jobs every year and a half, every 2 years, and who tend to have this sort of steady panic every 18 months. Oh my God, I just lost that one. Will I get another? Especially as they age. So aging really starts to kick in here. And you notice that Warren here is kind of young. So precarity is part of it. But I'd be dishonest if I said that there wasn't another thing, which is the ambition, the striving, the classic Puritan desire to test oneself against the environment, against the community, and to find out, am I one of the chosen? Can I be? And that logic applies as powerfully to Warren as it does to Teresa in the Taqueria. Teresa came here from Mexico the hard way. We won't address questions of her legal status, but she is as committed to making a life for her family and to demonstrating that she is, in a sense, saved as Warren is. So that logic is everywhere. It's really quite powerful. Precarity and drive together are very powerful. So the question, I think, becomes for us, and let me just make sure I guess, oops, I'm going to go back there in a minute. The question for us is, if we inhabit a world, not just in Silicon Valley, but throughout the country, where we are both ambitious and precarious, what kinds of values, what kinds of institutions can we set in place to ensure that we work with and see other folks who are not like us, precisely not like us, and that we value everyone in the community, not simply the people that we've decided are saints. And to get there, now, okay, so forgive me, I'm an academic, right? I spend a lot of time thinking about the power of ideas in the world, and I overestimate them sometimes. So just bear with me. I'm going to try to make it worthwhile. To get there, I think a first step is torpedoing an older and still in the Bay Area very attractive vision. I want to show you that vision for a moment. Some of you may recognize the poet Richard Brautigan. In 1967, he was quite the hipster, very good looking. He wrote a book called Trout Fishing in America that I read in 8th grade, and it just made me think, oh my God, there's a world out there somewhere. I got to get to it. Somehow they had that in the school library. But Richard Brautigan, for our story, is an important figure in a different way. He wrote and handed out on the streets of San Francisco a poem. The poem is called All Watched Over by Machines of Loving Grace. And it's a poem that's been circulating in Silicon Valley and stories about Silicon Valley ever since it came out in San Francisco. And I want to flag it because it links the dream of machines to the dream of a kind of garden-like utopia. A garden-like utopia itself rooted in a 17th century vision of Puritan America. Puritans hoping to escape in England and move to a garden where God would tend them. I like to think, writes Brautigan, and the sooner the better, of a cybernetic meadow where mammals and computers live together in mutually programming harmony, like pure water touching clear sky. I like to think right now, please, of a cybernetic forest filled with pines and electronics, where deer stroll peacefully past computers as if they were flowers with spinning blossoms. I like to think it has to be of a cybernetic ecology where we are free of our labors and joined back to nature, returned to our mammal brothers and sisters, and all watched over by machines of loving grace. This is the world, ladies and gentlemen, that our tech industries are promising to build for us. And it's a world that doesn't include people like Teresa. It's a world that renders them invisible. All of our eyes are turned up to heaven, and as long as they are turned toward the making of profit and the seeking of heaven, it's going to be really hard to build the conditions for the protection of all beings who inhabit this place. Step one, in my view, and I think Mary Beth would agree with me on this, is very literally, very mundanely, very practically working at seeing the actual people and the actual places that our technological firms are building, employing, relying on as they go about trying to build what they claim is a new digital heaven. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Kuhan says, I hope these can be put on exhibit in the Bay Area somewhere, everywhere. These photos and stories are incredibly moving. Nomi over at the Goethe says, I would love to have them at the Goethe Institute. So,
oh, we could, so Nomi, somebody ping me back, right? Because Mary Beth we have prints coming to Stanford. Stanford has just bought a pile of these prints. and they're going to do an internal show. But we have wanted these to be hanging in the Bay Area, and we have not found a way to do that. And it's not expensive, and we would love to help with that. So just write me an email. I would be thrilled.
Great. And then Emily says, from a psychology and wellness perspective, precarity is not actually supportive to innovation. Healthy, sustainable creativity requires stability, but the Silicon Valley mentality and cultural value set is deeply dedicated to the idea that whipping people forces novel thinking.
Pause right there. Can I respond to that one? I think that's really, really important. Emily, thank you for that very much. One of the things that I say, and I'm glad that the Goethe Institute is co-sponsoring this, I am frequently told by my tech friends, so I do run in tech circles sometimes, and they will tell me that, no, Fred, we have to keep that because it's what drives that whip hand moving, because it's what drives the high-end folks to pursue the wealth and pursue their vision. And this is critical. It's what gives us leverage over lower end folks. So at Tesla, it's what keeps our salaries down. And that combination of driving the top and keeping the bottom down in the view of the tech leaders that I know is the key to innovation. I push back, and when I push back, I cite Germany. I think of the Ruhrgebiet, which is an industrial area with incredibly strong tradition of innovation, also a strong tradition of worker councils. And one of the things that I think can happen, and I think has started to happen a little bit, both with German scholars and French scholars who I know, is that people have begun to speak back from Europe to America and say, no, it doesn't have to be that way. It can be a different way. You can have a robust innovation culture and a robust social welfare state at the same time. Because Emily, you're absolutely right. Innovation does not depend on beating up people, quite the contrary.
Craig says, as we know, lots of SV work happens in the East Bay, especially Fremont and Milpitas. Shouldn't they be included?
Yeah, so they absolutely should be, and they frequently are. And in fact, in our book, we have a worker from Tesla who is an East Bay worker, and we do include that. The sort of just very traditional canonical definition is the one I showed you on the map, but I would absolutely agree that they should be included.
Emily says the benefits of social democracy. Cool. Thank you. Lisa says,
very definitely.
And thank you. Any more questions?
While those questions are coming in, I want to pick back up on where, and I will answer Noemi's question in a minute, but pick back up on Emily's thing. This is, I think, one of the distinguishing features of American fantasies of innovation. American ideas of innovation are so centered in the individual, not because individualism is a particularly good way to make stuff. I mean, yes, Edison was great, Alexander Graham Bell were great, but neither one of them could ever have done what they did without robust technological infrastructures in place or other workers. We tell these sort of heroic stories to ourselves because of sort of governing myths we have in our country, like the myth of the city on the hill. And it's a weird thing for a historian to be walking around in the present and see these hundreds of year-old myths governing people's thinking. It just makes you crazy. It's sort of like a cloud that we're walking around in. Social democracy is actually an excellent way to organize innovation. Just talk to the folks over at Novartis who come from Denmark, and Denmark's doing great, and they make great drugs. And so, okay, that concludes that rant. I appreciate it. Noemi, are things changing? That's a great question. Yeah, they're changing, but not necessarily for the better. I've been here for 20 years, and it's really interesting. To my surprise and chagrin, the areas that used to have pockets of income diversity have really been wiped out, or they've gotten incredibly dense. So I work with a group here in Mountain View. It was actually founded by women. They're all undocumented. They're all working here in the Valley. And they got started right at the beginning of the pandemic when the services that they relied on shut down. And they began to think, how can we do for ourselves? And they reached out to a couple of local activists, and it's spun into a real foundation at this point. So they often work in an area of Mountain View that is a series of apartment buildings. You look at those apartment buildings and you think, wow, they're beautiful, really nice California apartments. What you don't know is that it's 2 and 3 families to an apartment. And so what I see change-wise is I see an increasing concentration of wealth, a continued pushing out of people who aren't wealthy, and I see very little in the way of provision offered by the companies that are making their money here. You see these apartment buildings built for their high-end tech workers, great, but what is Facebook giving back? What is Amazon giving back? What is Apple giving back? Apple, they built a huge circular campus saying that we're all a circle, we're all one, it's like a countercultural moment, but it's a fortress. What have they given back? And I think that's a really important question. It's not answered. But so I think things are changing. I'm sorry to be such a crank today. I really feel like I should be more optimistic, but not necessarily for the better. I saw another question there. Did you have one, Peter?
No, there's quite a few, actually.
Oh, okay, great.
What can be done about the extraordinary economic inequality? It seems you are just now answering it. Okay, well.
Yeah, well, it's a great question. So one thing that's really critical is we have to stop thinking about individuals and machines. When I talk with my students, when I teach the history of technology in America, which I do, I talk about how machines are never just tools and people aren't the only things that use them. Machines depend on large social and industrial systems, just as people do. And the place to negotiate the effects of technology is absolutely not at the user-machine interface. That's where the companies would like us to do it. They would like us to sign a little contract saying you can have this much information, not that much information. Legislation needs to be happening in the places that it's always happened with industry. It needs to be happening at the governmental level and at the union level. These companies are industries. They would like to tell us that they're ethereal, that they don't have a material presence, that they shouldn't be regulated like industries because they are special, they are saints. None of that is true. These are industries, they are extractive industries. Just as the oil industry sucked oil out of the ground and polluted the landscape, companies like Meta are sucking oil, so to speak, out of the social landscape and leaving pollution behind. We need to regulate those in the way that we have regulated other industries. We know how to do it, and we need to get on it.
Greg asks, any comments on the recent lawsuit versus Tesla alleging ugly racial discrimination, i.e., does the quote-unquote saint at the helm in his discourse bear any responsibility?
Oh, without question, without question. And, thank you for asking that question. Sainthood is traditionally in American culture, of course, associated with whiteness. And, so much of them, America's racial history is enormously complex, but one place that you see it emerging a lot, and you see it again here in the Valley, is when there is economic conflict, when salaries need to be held down, the race card gets played. And I find that really, really interesting. So yes, he absolutely bears responsibility. In addition to disenfranchising Black workers and treating them horribly, that's a company that took, in the case of the guy who's in our book, a company that he used to be a car worker making $120,000 a year in a union job. They de-unionized and they pay their workers $40,000 a year. Tesla has one of the highest injury rates in the industry. So its racial problems are part of a larger suite of problems for which Elon Musk is absolutely responsible. And yeah.
Given the importance that the real SV be seen, and these photos do such an excellent job, but in the media landscape of unlimited and accelerating volumes of fake imagery, how do we get these images of the real above the fray? Are gallery spaces the only way?
Well, it's a great question and a depressing one. So I don't know. And Mary Beth and I worked really hard at this. We had this strange experience when we were developing the book before the French had bought it. National Geographic decided to do a feature on Silicon Valley, and they sent a photographer. The photographer focused on the young Burning Man set, and I've spent time at Burning Man, and I'm fine with that. But she had lots of puddles of 28-year-olds in cuddle puddles. If you don't know what a cuddle puddle is, ask me later. And it was kind of wild, and it looked like just fun and frolic and tech. Oh my. And then they asked Mary Beth for one picture of the people who lived in the trailers. And there's a kind of tokenizing of difference in this space that we don't know how to get around yet. People have, since this book came out, people reach out to Mary Beth literally for pictures of poor people in Silicon Valley, because they want to sort of point that out almost as a way of legitimating the stories that are continue about the figures like Musk. So I don't know how we get that above the fray. And I think it's a question that we faced in the 30s. One of the things about those great Farm Security Administration photographs of the Depression and of the Dust Bowl is that through photography, it became possible to see what was actually happening in the Dust Bowl. I don't know how we get things out now, but we've got to try. I have a deep fantasy, if anybody wants to fund it, I have a fantasy of doing a Farm Security Administration kind of effort with multiple photographers for tech. I think that's really important to see how tech is changing the globe. But I really don't know. I haven't been able to find a way other than galleries, and I wish I could.
Fred, didn't you write earlier about the connections between technology and the counterculture? Can we have more of that?
Yeah, I did. Okay. Thank you, whoever asked that. Yeah, my first academic book, I was a journalist for 10 years before I became an academic. When I went to graduate school, I moved from Boston to California, San Diego. And when I got to San Diego, thank you, Jim, I appreciate the comment there. I got to San Diego, there was this thing called the internet happening. And I was sort of like, what's this thing? And then I saw Wired magazine, and there in Wired magazine was Stuart Brand and a whole series of ex-hippies. And I had just finished writing a book as a journalist on how Americans remembered the Vietnam War, in which computers were the emblem of the Cold War military state. And so my mind is blown. What are all these hippies doing celebrating computers in the 90s as tools for liberation? And that became a book called From Counterculture to Cyberculture that tracks the impact of Stuart Brand and the Whole Earth Network on how we think about computers. For folks who may not know the story, Stuart Brand and the Whole Earth Catalog come together in the late 60s, and the people around that ultimately give us some of the following phrases: personal computer, electronic frontier, virtual community. They literally teach Americans to reimagine militarized computing as tools of communal style liberation. And that's what that book is about. And because of that book, I have my job. So very lucky.
Well, we are approaching the top of the hour. Fred, is there any last thoughts that you have or reflections?
Well, mostly it's gratitude. I'm so grateful to see all the faces and the names on the screen. One of the things when you write books, and I'm sure I know a number of you know this, when you write books and you try to make them go out in the world and have some kind of impact, you never know if they do. And you never know if they actually get out in the world at all. And so to see folks taking a sunny afternoon and spending it with me here on Zoom to hear more about this, I'm so grateful. It's really, really very nice. And I hope and trust that we can practice seeing each other and seeing folks not like ourselves as we go out into our evening today.
Well, Fred, we are grateful to you for this compelling, very enlightening talk and show. And it's an honor and pleasure to have you in our orbit once again. And thanks to all of you in the audience for joining us. I have posted links with which you may purchase some of Fred's books. Our next session is coming up at 6 p.m. It's going to be a workshop offered by Ramesh Srinivasan. It's going to be held at the Kambar Forum inside the Exploratorium here in San Francisco. It is free to the public. It's called Technologies of Life, Embracing the Interconnectedness Between People, Beings, Past, Present, and in Our Dreams. The festival has been made possible by City Lights in conjunction with the Goethe Institut, San Francisco, the MIT Press, and the Center for International Security Studies at the University of Sydney. Thank you all so very, very much for joining us. It's been such a pleasure. Some great comments in the chat. Fred,
thank you, Peter.
well,
Thank you. So great to be part of the City Lights orbit. Really nice. And the Goethe Institute too. Thank you. I appreciate it.